let me tell you just a little bit about our featured speaker today. I'm very excited to be able to do this. Colonel Bob Lilac, United States Air Force retired. Colonel Lilac served in a wide range of positions in the Air Force. After entering service in 1958 as a second lieutenant with the National Security Agency, he trained as a jet pilot. He served 3 years in the United Kingdom flying F-100s. We've got one of those just outside today. He flew 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, completing 100 combat missions over North Vietnam in the F-104 that we're going to hear about today. In 1967 and 68, he was selected to attend the United States Air Force Aerospace Research Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base, where he trained as both a test pilot and a space research pilot. He flew the rocket-propelled F-104 to over 100,000 feet, a story which I really want to hear about today. 100,000 feet. He flew 30 different types of aircrafts. He's a lifetime member of the Society of Experimental Test Pilots. He was awarded the Defense Superior Service Medal, Legion of Merit, Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal with 8 oak leaf clusters, along with other service medals and campaign medals for his 25 years of active duty. He served tours as a military advisor in Saudi Arabia, as a commander of the Air Force A-10 Fighter Squadron, at the Pentagon as Chief of Air Force International Programs for Saudi Arabia from 1979-1981. Also, as the NSC staff at the Reagan White House. He retired in 1984, and along with his wife Jan, opened up Lilac & Associates, a consulting firm specializing in aerospace and international business. Bob and Jan continued on with their business for many years until they finally retired here to Palm Desert, and they also spend a bit of time up in Montana in the summertime when apparently it's just too hot for some of us. Won't you please welcome my friend, Colonel Bob Lilac.
Greg says he's got me wired for sound, and he thanked a lot of the people that I was going to thank. I just want to call recognition to a couple of other folks here. Would any of the members of the restoration crew stand up who might be here? That means they're all out working. Here we go. Where's Larry O'Brien? Larry's hired. Oh, Larry's back there holding his cat. Dan Forbush, we got guys. These guys, thanks guys. Larry O'Brien is actually the crew chief. His name is on the F-104. Is responsible for leading the restoration crew that put this airplane in the shape it's in today. It was a camouflaged airplane when it came in on a flatbed truck. And they did a lot of work. They're working on a lot of airplanes right now, and as Greg says, we're getting more airplanes here, and Larry leads that crew along with the maintenance guys that are putting those airplanes together, and they deserve a round of applause. They do great work for us. And before I get into my program, I got one other guy I want to call attention to here, and that's Colonel Buzz Lynch. Buzz, would you stand up? Colonel Buzz Lynch. Buzzy was an Air Force test pilot as well, flew the F-104, and was past president of the Society of Experimental Test Pilots, a fellow in the society, and a great friend of mine and a wonderful contributor to aerospace development throughout his career. So today I'm just going to tell you a story, a couple of stories actually. That's to get your attention, so in case anybody's asleep. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background, a little bit about the 104, and then about the 104 in Vietnam, and lastly, my special story about the rocket NF-104 flight that I was able to make. And after we get done, I'll work on answering your questions. I want to start off with a little mood setter. A lot of you people associated with aviation have probably heard of the poem High Flight by RAF Canadian pilot by the name of McGee, John McGee, who was killed at 19 years of age in a Spitfire. And the year before that, he wrote this poem. This poem is set to music, and it's set to flying with the F-104. So bear with me, I'm just going to get through this. It's about a 2-minute little video to show you something that's fun.
of sun-split clouds, and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. The windswept heights with easy grace, when never lark nor even eagle flew. And while with silent, lifting mind, I trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God.
It's almost a tearjerker, isn't it? Great. I touch real quickly on my background. I was born in upstate New York and went through college in ROTC, 25 years in the Air Force, and had a flying career, that was, I think, unbeatable. You couldn't buy this. But I'm now able to sit here and tell you my war stories at the Air Museum, and to think about all this great flying, including that 104 in the high flight film. And you guys paid for it. You guys paid for all the gas, which is great. That's my mom, my two brothers and I. I grew up in upstate New York on the banks of the Hudson River, about 30 miles north of Albany.
What are you, Bob?
I'm the guy with the hat on. They went and met me for the Navy. And anyway, where is that? That's on the Saratoga Battlefield. You remember the Revolutionary War? The Saratoga Battlefield was right on the banks of the Hudson. I was actually born right on the edge of the Saratoga Battlefield. I got a double E degree from RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, joined the Air Force as second lieutenant, and then retired as a colonel in '84. So went in from '58 to '84. My wife Jan and I, she's right here, lived in Washington, D.C. for about 20 years after retirement and had a consulting business. And as Greg said, we're now here in Palm Desert, and we do have a getaway place up in Montana on the edge of the Glacier National Park. And we have 4 kids and 8 grandkids and 2 great-grandkids, and wow, I even have my mother-in-law here today. How about that? Thank you, Kathy. These are the airplanes I flew. I started out flying the T-34, left to right up there, T-34, T-37, the T-33 in training. I was lucky enough to get fighters, so I flew the F-100, which is right outside the door here. I've actually got more time in the 100 than I got in the 104, and we've got other F-100 drivers here, Al Dempsey, Chapman. Who else is a 100 driver? Buzzy. Buzzy Lindsay's got a couple thousand hours in the F-100. So we've got a lot of experience. Or anybody else here fly any of these F-100 or 104? I got to get my fact checkers out of the way here. Buzzy said he wasn't going to throw up the red BS flag to any of my stories. So. Anyway, after the 100, I was able to get into the F-104, and where I flew it in Vietnam, a couple of tours. And then later on, after going through the school up at Edwards, which I'll talk about a little bit more later, I was able to test a few airplanes, not as many as Buzzy, but I tested the first Air Force A-7D Corsair II. I ran the test program on the F-5E and F, and believe it or not, finished up my career as an A-10 Warthog Squadron Commander. That Warthog, as you know, is a great machine. F-104 goes fast, the Warthog goes slow. It's known as the only airplane that the Air Force had that got bird strikes from the rear. But still doing a great job. And of course, it's very controversial now. The Air Force has not got an airplane, even with the F-35 coming along, that can replace the gun in that A-10, the 30-millimeter gun. That's a contentious issue that'll still live with us as we continue to try to solve the close air support problem in the future. That's me in one of my hero shots. I was able to fly most models of the F-104. Started out at George Air Force Base up here in Victorville, California. 2 tours in Da Nang, one at Da Nang in Vietnam, the other at Udorn in Thailand, flying up north, and then later on at Edwards. There's our airplane, the one that's behind you. Slick piece of machinery, designed by Kelly Johnson, the famous Lockheed Skunk Works. Initially meant to be a high-speed interceptor, and it's extremely fast. But as I told several of the folks that were climbing around the cockpit in the 104 earlier, speed is overrated, because in most cases you have to slow down to do your job. Even Gordy Jenkins, who flew 100 missions over North Vietnam in the 105, every once in a while he had to slow down, even if it was only to land. But speed is overrated, because usually you get from point A to point B and you want to go there fast, but once you leave point A and get to point B, you usually have to slow down to do that job, do whatever job you're designed to do. So, how fast is that airplane? Mach 2.2 or so, roughly just under 1,500 miles an hour at 35,000 feet. The little tiny wings on that airplane, I don't know if any of you folks had a chance to crawl around it back there, but we've got wing guards on it, because you can on those very sharp wings, you can cut your head. I was showing a couple of young children that we had around, I was getting them an impression in their forehead by the crease from the sharpness of that wing. But that wing is extremely thin. It's thin so it can go fast quick, as opposed to the wings on this one, which are pretty thick, so it's a lot of drag. That is a low drag airplane. Little tiny wings, not a great turner, but go fast quick airplane. Is that somebody asking me a question, or is that Larry talking to his cat? Oh, never mind. The F-104 held a lot of altitude and speed records. Still holds today the low altitude speed record, officially at 988 miles an hour at about 60 feet off of the lake beds up north, and held by Darrell Greenemar. Is Darrell here today? Darrell lives in La Quinta, by the way. Darrell put together a private F-104 and set the low altitude speed record, and was going to go out and set an altitude record in another one, and he had a problem with the airplane and had to eject out of it. But Darrell's a Lockheed test pilot. He's one of our favorite guys to come out here to the museum. He's one of our local heroes. Bob Gilliland, who lives in Palm Desert, also was an F-104 test pilot. And I guess I do want to call attention, might as well do it right now. When we dedicated this airplane last year, Buzzy Lynch's name is on the airplane, mine is on it. We dedicated the airplane to Norm Schmidt, I'll tell you that story. But another Lockheed test pilot that was here was Jack Suitcase Simpson. He flew early models of this airplane, and this picture over here shows a downward ejection. The airplane in the early models had downward ejection. So he had to eject, he was doing a test, the tip tank came off, tore the tail off, the airplane went out of control, so Suitcase had to eject through the bottom of the airplane. That's Suitcase right there for his ride. Mentioned Suitcase's name because he passed away last week. He fought a long battle with congestive heart failure and died at about, what, Buzzy, 85 about, was Suitcase? Something like that. Let's see.
Question? How did you get that name? Suitcase.
Suitcase? Some Chicago Cubs baseball player. I can't remember who he was in the 1920s. I don't remember, but it was from his childhood. This is a busy chart, and we've already covered most of it, but the airplane empty weight was about 12,000 pounds. Full fuel takeoff weight was about 19,000 pounds. And a single J-79 engine in the airplane produced about 15,000 pounds of thrust, so it's not quite one-to-one, but pretty close. Max altitude is listed at, or spec'd at, about 50,000 feet. I'll tell you my story of taking it over 100,000 feet. And the regular F-104, you can get up over 90,000 feet. Buzzy and I both been up over 90,000 feet in the regular 104. The rocket airplane was able to get a little bit higher. Could carry a couple of bombs, put missiles on the wingtips, carried a nuclear weapon on the center line in some versions. We'll talk a little bit about that. The Canadians, the Germans, and the Italians flew NATO missions, and they flew a nuclear mission, low altitude and bad weather. One of the one of the things I'd like to show you about this airplane is a unique aspect of it. If you look at this little display case over here with the boots, on the back of the boots there's a pair of what we call spurs. They came in gunmetal gray when the Air Force issued us to us, but when we fighter pilots got a hold of them, we chromed them. We put them on chrome, and those clipped into cables, into balls, into cables in the seat, so that it would pull your legs back into the back of the seat, so it didn't rip your legs off if you had to eject out of it. It was actually also very good for getting attention in the officers club when you walked in with spurs on, and people knew you were an F-104 driver. And that's not that fighter pilots needed any extra attention, but that's what was one that distinguished us F-104 drivers from others. It covered the downward ejection, suitcase's case, and the spurs. We also had a lot of 104s that flew at other countries around the world. It flew in many NATO countries, and I mentioned that Canada, Italy, and Germany lost a lot of airplanes. People have probably heard of the story about the Widowmaker. Everybody thought the F-104 was a Widowmaker. I think that gave the airplane a bad rap. People thought the Germans lost more than anybody else. They really didn't. The Canadians actually lost more percentage-wise airplanes than any of the other countries, and then the Italians, and then the Germans. That's about 50, 40, and 30, actually a little bit under 50 for the Canadians. But it was flying low-altitude missions in bad weather, flew the NATO mission in Europe, trying to carry a nuclear weapon into far East Germany or Western Russia. And a lot of low-altitude, bad weather flying was the main reason, I think, for the loss. Didn't really have that much to do with the airplane. The airplane was pretty good. Did have some problems in the early stages with engines, but later on everything stabilized and they got the ejection, the downward ejection versus upward ejection thing squared away. By the way, people might ask, and I'll presume a question, why did they have the downward ejection that Suitcase had to jump out of? They thought, if you turn around and take a look at the airplane behind you, it's got a high tail on it. And if the guy ejected out of it at high speed, they thought the ejection seat might not push him high enough to clear that tail. So that tail might cut you in half if it didn't have enough boost to get you out of that envelope where you might hit the tail. So initially, the designers and the Air Force guys that were overseeing them said, well, let's do a downward ejection. Well, we killed more people in downward ejection in the early models. They killed about 20 guys. And so then they finally got their head screwed on straight, and they improved the ejection seat a little bit better, and we went straight to upward ejection. Lockheed sold a lot of airplanes to a lot of countries. This is a list of countries, 15 of them, over 2,500 airplanes produced. Produced under license in foreign countries. They're actually, Lockheed built over 700 of them, the Italians built over 400, Germans about 600 or 700, Japan built them, and Canada and Taiwan also produced co-produced the airplane. So what did the 104 do? Initially, as I said, it was designed as a high-altitude, fast interceptor. So it went to Air Defense Command initially. It flew at bases near borders to protect against invading bombers. It flew in active duty units and with the Air National Guard. And the Tactical Air Command had only one wing, the 479 TAC Fighter Wing up at George, which is where I flew the airplane initially. By the way, that I keep referring to up there. I'm talking about George Air Force Base up on the edge of the Mojave Desert, not too far from where Edwards Air Force Base is, up near Palmdale, Victorville, Mojave. The 479th had one squadron that deployed to Vietnam, where I flew my 2 combat tours, so we really only had one squadron there the whole time. It was continuous pretty much for most of 1965, and then we went back in the summer of 66 and they flew through 1967. So I had a limited tour and limited application in Vietnam, because it was designed as an air defense interceptor, but tactical mission, we could still do our job fairly well with the gun and the bombs that we carried, and we also primarily did a lot of escort missions. The airplane also flew at a lot at Edwards Air Force Base in support of NASA and X-15 space shuttles. Buzzy Lynch tells stories about taking off with the 104 and chasing SR-71s on missions, which, and the SR-71 was the only airplane that could run away from this F-104. What did we do in Vietnam? I went 1965 the first time. We flew MiG-cap, escorting radar-seeking airplanes, search airplanes, flying over the Gulf of Tonkin, shortly after the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Second tour I went back, and I didn't fly very long. I only flew about 20 missions the first time. I went back the second time in 1966, and we had various missions. Initially started out with some Wild Weasel escort. Gordy Jenkins here flew at Wild Weasel missions in the F-105, and we would escort them into going in to try to search their missile sites, which was an interesting mission, by the way. If you haven't ever read much about the story of Wild Weasels, that's a whole separate world, and Gordy has a presentation that Greg may get him to give here one Saturday, where he tells some war stories about going in and let the missile site shoot at you, duck the missiles, and then go in and kill the missile sites. We were escorting those airplanes. We also did some close air support, carried 2 bombs not very far in that 104, but we did a pretty effective job doing it. And we also just did some basic escort missions. Udorn, Thailand is the furthest, most north base that the U.S. Air Force operated on when we were flying in North Vietnam. It's a picture of the RC-121 radar airplanes that we escorted in the Gulf. We'd take off, perform in-flight refueling, go up and try to fly over the top of these airplanes that were flying at about 180 knots down on the deck, and we're up above them trying to fly circles to keep them in sight. And while we were there, the MiGs never came after the radar airplanes. I don't know if it's because of us or because they just didn't have enough MiGs to come after them. One of our F-104s was shot down on this kind of a mission. He got tried to get vectored to a radar airplane, got in weather, wound up over Hainan Island, and was shot down. Phil Smith, he was a prisoner of war for 8 years, guest of the Chinese during the whole Vietnam War. The only Air Force pilot that was a captive, a prisoner of war with the Chinese. At Udorn, airplanes were camouflaged, and on this, I was talking to some of the folks when we were climbing in the cockpit. This probe that runs on the side of the airplane is our in-flight refueling probe. So we got up in the air, and we need to refuel before we went up toward Hanoi. And the KC-135 707 airplane would reel out a hose with a basket on the end of it, about that big around. And that little probe, you'd come up and stick it into the probe and get gas, fill up, and then go do your mission and come back, and if you needed to, get gas on the way back out as well. We refueled on every flight on our missions going up toward Hanoi. And I think this one is kind of a fun slide. This is where it really counts. These are the guys that did the work to keep us flying. A couple of hundred people running in one squadron. And you know, our flights were like 2.5 hours long, and sometimes longer if you're flying a ResCap mission or rescue mission. And you only had about 10 minutes of busy work when you're in the target area, ducking missiles or rolling in on a target, ducking an aircraft fire, whatever we were doing. And then we got to go home, land, take a shower, and go to the bar and have a steak and drink booze. And these guys had to repair the airplanes, make them work, and they were the hardest working guys during the whole war as far as I was concerned in the U.S. Air Force. And I don't mean to belittle the mission that a lot of you Army folks did when you're out there in the mud and getting shot at and that sort of stuff. But these guys, as far as the Air Force is concerned, were the hardest workers that we had in the Air Force. Okay, this is a hard part of the story for me. That single squadron deployed, lost 14 airplanes during that time we were flying up there. On my second tour, and starting in July of 1966, we started flying Wild Weasel escort missions. And on the 1st of August of 1966, remember, we're talking about this airplane that's a super fast airplane. We're talking almost 50 years ago. So it's a great technology that was working 50 years ago. So on the 1st of August of 1966, Norm and I were flying escort of wild weasels, F-105 wild weasel guys up north, and a flight of F-104s. We had 3 flights of F-104s. In front of me, there was a 2-ship flight, and Norm and I were flying behind him, and up in front, our operations officer, Colonel Tom Finney, got shot down and was killed, hit by a missile. Norm and I went in and did our escort work with our weasel flight that went in. We did not get hit. We ducked a few missiles. Flight behind us came in, and a young captain by the name of Jack Portnick, that same mission, got hit by a missile and was killed. Lost 7 airplanes that day. And we lost 4 thuds, 2 104s, and 1 RF-101 recce airplane. 7 airplanes on that 1st of August. So that was the 1st of August. Exactly 1 month later, Norm took off and was flying a interdiction mission in the southern part of North Vietnam, dropping bombs on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, Mugia Pass area, and was shot down by anti-aircraft fire. Bad weather, Norm ejected, got on the ground. We sent Sandys in and helicopters in to try to get him out. 2 Sandys got shot down. One of the Sandy pilots was killed. The other Sandy pilot had half his wing shot off. I was airborne by this time and went and helped escort him back to Nakhon Phanom Air Base where he had to eject. So we lost Norm in the ejection, lost a Sandy pilot who was killed. The other pilot got out. Before we could get the helicopters in to get Norm, the bad guys got him. So Norm Schmidt became a prisoner of war on the 1st of September. Almost 1 year exactly later, on the 31st of August 1967, Norm was taken away to interrogation and never came back. They heard some screaming and noise, but Norm never came back. The assumption is he was tortured to death. Anyway, Norm was killed in captivity, and that is the reason that we have dedicated this airplane, and those of you who have looked at close to it, right back where Bill Hughes is standing now at that airplane, there's an F-104 rondelle around the airplane, and it says dedicated in tribute to Colonel Norm Schmidt. Norm's widow, Marie Schmidt, was here for our dedication. When we had our dedication of this airplane, she's a retired school teacher up in Apple Valley. Marie Schmidt was here, and as a result of Marie's visit and the dedication of the airplane, there was some publicity associated with it, and a gal up in Portland, Oregon saw it. She said, "Hey," called to contact the museum, "I've got Norm Schmidt's POW MIA bracelet." She contacted the museum. They contacted Dr. Dave Thompson, who's standing over here. Dave contacted me. We got Marie and this lady in Portland together, gave the bracelet, wound up bringing them all together and giving the bracelet to Norm Schmidt's grandson, whose name is Norm Schmidt. I'm going to get emotional, Gordy, okay? Anyway, end of that story was that as a result of that, we started the idea to collect other prisoner of war and missing in action bracelets, which we started, and Dr. Dave Thompson heads up that project. Over here on this wall is the prisoner of war and missing in action wall with hundreds of pictures, and in this display case are hundreds of bracelets. Dave is going to be available. If any of you, please, would you stop and talk to Dave a little after the presentation. And we'd like to get more bracelets. We're going to put this in our new hangar, and we're going to make it a permanent memorial to a different kind of a Vietnam wall for the prisoners of war and missing in action. So I'd like you to help us contribute to that. Anyway, that is my story of Norm, and it could get a lot more detailed, but I'm going to move on. We completed our tour of duty by flying 100 missions over North Vietnam. First guy completed his in September of '66. I was able to complete mine in December of '66, and then was assigned as a pilot, instructor pilot, flying F-104s at Luke Air Force Base, teaching Germans how to fly the F-104. Some people said I didn't do a very good job of that. In mid-1967, I was selected to attend the U.S. Air Force Research Pilot School. at Edwards Air Force Base. That's where Edwards is where Chuck Yeager broke the speed of sound. It's where all the NASA testing goes on. All Air Force development testing goes on at Edwards Air Force Base as well as NASA flying. The Aerospace Research Pilot School is a year program, about 6 months of how to become a test pilot, which is just precision flying with a lot of academics. And the second phase I call astronaut prep school. We had about 25 pilots or so to be exposed to the basics of space flight. Colonel Buzzy Lynch and I are both graduates of that test pilot school. We have any other graduates of test pilot school here? Okay, well, Buzzy and I had great opportunities to do some unique things. In the space prep program, the astronaut prep part of that program, it was doing things like practicing shuttle landings, using that F-104, diving at the ground with the F-104 with the gear out and the flaps out from 10,000 feet and diving at the runway and then pulling back and try to land it so you could simulate a shuttle landing. The first African-American astronaut to be, Bob Lawrence, was killed about the day that I got there doing that. He was in a two-seater. The instructor pilot in the back seat was able to get out. Bob Lawrence didn't make it. A lot of things went on with that airplane. Another friend of Buzzy's and mine was killed when his spacesuit came apart. The wrist lock came off at 60,000 feet on a Zoom mission. And he died, and we buried him in Idaho later that year. The airplane, the F-104, was used in that Aerospace Research Pilot School to expose astronauts to, and most of the astronauts' names, the well-known names that you know, Pete Knight and Bob Rushworth and Neil Armstrong, all those guys flew this F-104 up at Edwards as well. I'm going to cut it short in a few minutes here so I can answer your question. I'll tell you a short story about a very special airplane that I was able to fly, the MF-104 Aerospace Trainer. There were only 3 of these airplanes built, and Lockheed changed 3 of those airplanes, put a 6,000-pound thrust rocket built into the tail. And I'll show you some more of that in a minute. If you look here, this picture actually shows the rocket in the tail, built right into the tail. Only 3 of them built. A little bit more detail on it. It shows the rocket in the tail. It also had reaction-controlled jets in the nose and in the wings to control the airplane above the atmosphere after you had the jet shut down when you're up around 100,000 feet. Show you a short clip of this, of the airplane taking off. This only lasts about a minute. This is one of those 3 airplanes. And I think, I'm not sure, I'll check the tail number. I think this is the one that I flew. Yeah, 760, that's the one that I flew on the rocket flight that I had. I'll give you a little bit more detail in a minute. So you took off normal, lit the rocket, accelerate, and then the reaction control jets, which I'll show you here in a second, control the roll, the pitch, and the yaw up at high altitude where the normal aerodynamic flight controls didn't work. The aileron and rudder didn't work. That showed just the demonstration of the reaction control thrust off the nose and on the wings. That's the airplane where it sits today outside the test pilot school at Edwards. This is a picture showing the wings were extended about 2 feet, and they had little reaction control jets in the wings, and then we had similar reaction control jets in the nose as well. There was also a nitrogen pressurization system in this airplane, so that when you shut the jet down, you still had some basic pressurization, so you didn't have to inflate the spacesuit when you were flying. This is the way I looked when I went out to fly the NF-104. It's a standard pressure suit that people flew in the X-15, and we flew in the NF-104, and some of the early astronaut flights used this suit. The Apollo suits were a little bit fancier than this, and some of the current ones, I guess, are a lot more fancy. In 1963, Chuck Yeager, the man who was the first person to fly faster than the speed of sound, was a commandant of the Aerospace Research Pilot School. He went out to set the altitude record in one of those 3 airplanes that were built, number 762. He took the airplane off, got it up a little over 100,000 feet, got the angle of attack, was a little bit too high, it went into a spin. He tried to recover it with the reaction control jets, wasn't able to do it, had to eject, got burned up pretty bad, spent a lot of time in the hospital, and they shut this particular program down for a while. I want to show you a film clip, and this is worth showing, even though we're moving on time. This is worth showing you. This is the Hollywood version from the movie The Right Stuff.
You read it? Yeah.
This is Chuck getting ready to go fly the F-104.
I might have.
Even though the Hollywood version doesn't have an NF, it uses a regular F-104, but it shows you the trouble that he went through as he tried to set this world altitude
I think I
record.
see a plane over here with a name on it. Now you know. Hey, what's that? Anyone got clearance? What kind of a plane is that? Aircraft taxi on ramp. Did you file a flight plan? Aircraft taxi on ramp. Did you file a flight plan? Yeah, I'm just taking her up the ring around here a little bit.
By the way, that actor is Sam Shepard. If anybody's wondering who's playing Chuck Yeager.
No, sir. No objections. You are clear to taxi. He must have clearance, right? Yeah, sure. He must. It's here someplace.
Little ways. As I said, Hollywood, when they put the movie together, didn't have an NF, so this airplane doesn't have a rocket in it, but it does show the basic of its ejection. Passing 70,000 feet there in that altimeter. 85. There's 100,000. World altitude record was 118 at that time. This is where the airplane pitched up and went into a spin. seat burned him up pretty bad during his ejection. Got a fire in his face mask with 100% oxygen in his face mask, burned him up really bad. Spent quite a few months in the hospital after. He was trying to get his face mask off. So, after Chuck's accident, the program was shut down for several years, and in 1968 they decided to start it up again. They decided to start it up again with 4 pilots selected in the Aerospace Research Pilot School to fly the program. I was one of them, and this shows Dean Vicon, who was one of my classmates, who flew it along with Mike Lowe, later of Air Force 4-star General, and our token Marine, Harry Blott, who got to fly it as well, and he actually later went on to become Deputy Commandant of the Marine Corps for Aviation. So, what was that? What did Chuck try to do? He tried to set an altitude record. This is a pretty busy chart, but basically, all I did was, when on my flight, take off, climb out 35,000 feet out east of Edwards Air Force Base, turn back west, a lot of stuff to check, a lot of checklist items to check, chamber pressures and tank pressures, and so go full afterburner, accelerate, get out to Mach 2 plus. I got about 2.2 plus, limited by turbine inlet temperature. Then go ahead and light the rocket, pull back 3.5 Gs, get on a climb angle, go up and it's about 65,000 feet, shut the afterburner down. About 80,000 feet, shut the jet down. So then you're just riding on the rocket till the rocket burns out. And how do you fly? You fly at an angle, and we had an attitude indicator that was set sort of like an ILS gauge, and you fly those gauges to a target angle of attack and altitude. So I got it up to, my altitude was 101,000 feet. Over the top, I'm just a bullet, not just gliding. The rocket's burned out, use reaction control jets, a handle on the dashboard to keep the nose flying, to keep the yaw to 0, and keep the pitch coming down, to keep your target angle of attack. And so you didn't get any roll, you used the reaction control jets until you got back down into the atmosphere, where you could still then use the aileron and the rudder to fly. Jet engine, get it started at about 35,000 feet. By the way, over the top, I could see from Baja all the way up to Monterey Peninsula. Blue goes to black up there. And if the jet didn't start, I could land on the lake bed. My jet started. I got to 101,830 feet. I remember that number. In June of 1968, it was a piece of cake. That's the cockpit, pretty standard cockpit, except for the little handle there that was the reaction control jet handle. And that's the AARS, the fancy attitude indicator that allowed us to fly on ILS, allowed me to fly on ILS while I was up there at 100,000 feet, to keep my angle of attack and my yaw rates to 0. There were hundreds of items on the checklist. I mean, all sorts of things. But again, I covered what we did. Relight the jet, land back, and as I said, it was a piece of cake. It was my last flight in the beautiful F-104. That was my specifics: 41 degrees of climb, 101,830, great ride, 36 minutes total flight. The actual aircraft I flew now sits on a pedestal up at Edwards Air Force Base, and I'm sort of here on a pedestal now at the Air Museum, being able to tell my war story to you. And just want to say to all of you, thank you for being here and for buying the gas to let me have this much fun. That's the earnings hymn. It's worth listening to for a second. But remember, all of you, that if you've got youngsters that you want to motivate, you got to tell them, you either have to grow up or become a fighter pilot. You don't have to do both. Well, we've got time for a few questions, but that hymn reminds me of something. You know the difference between God and a fighter pilot? You two guys can't answer. God doesn't think he's a fighter pilot. Anyway, questions? Any questions? Sure, let's start here.
On your rocket engine, is that a solid?
Let me get you on the microphone here real quick.
On the rocket engine, is that a solid?
No, it was a combination of hydrogen peroxide and JP4 as a mixture, hybrid kind of thing.
You mentioned close air support, and you never flew that kind of a mission, but I can picture an A-10 at close air support. How would you use a 104?
If you had my close air support missions I flew were in support of Marines, so you didn't have to didn't make any difference. Once in a while we hit one of those, but they were tough. They were able to handle it. Just with a good forward air controller mark on the target. We had a 20 millimeter gun. You could drop those. You could drop napalm. Napalm, it didn't make a difference as long as you were able to see a target and identify it, and you could, you dropped the napalm on that airplane. On the F-104, you dropped the napes at probably 400, 450. So it wasn't really in close. It was not designed for that. Not like the A-10 today with a gun. More questions? Yes?
Every time I look at that airplane with those small wings, I wonder how it flies. What, with a heavy airplane with such small wings, what kind of a wing loading does that have?
Oh, you asked me a technical question. Buzzy, give me the answer. How much wing loading on the 104? I have no idea the numbers. I don't know a number, but all you made it do was go fast. You just pushed it hard and you got enough lift to go, yeah. It was not a good turning airplane unless you had the guts to go ahead and put the flaps down and then fly against the F4. Greg told me not to do that. You could actually put the flaps down and make it turn a little better. But it only had 21-foot wingspan. So go back and play around with those. I'll wander back to the airplane. We're close to getting ready for our P-51 flight, so we'll take a few more questions anyway. Bill?
Did they ever figure out why when Yeager had to eject, he couldn't shake the seat? Why couldn't he get rid of the seat?
I don't know the answer to that. I think that when he ejected, I think it had something to do with his trajectory. He wasn't at 0G, but he didn't have enough for the butt snapper to work properly, I guess. I don't know whether it failed or not, but it was close to the seat motor when he finally did eject, and that the seat rocket motor is actually what started the fire in his helmet.
Bob?
One over here, Bob.
Yes, Dave?
Yeah, Bob. You had mentioned earlier about mid-cap missions, and I was doing some research on one of our POWs last night, and he was shot down on a mid-cap mission, and I didn't have any idea what that was. Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, it's just basically flying around and looking for the bad guys, and it's a combat air patrol is what CAP means. MiG is a bad guy airplane, combat air patrol. So you're flying around trying to keep the bad guys off the good guys like Gordy. Sometimes they were the ones that were shooting them down before we were. More questions?
Colonel, that was obviously a very dangerous and involved flight. Everything had to work exactly right. What happened did they ever find out what happened to Chuck? And what happened as far as...
There was a lot of speculation, different things. his reaction control jets, when he's up here and the airplane pitched up, the angle of attack went ballistic. Instead of flying at an angle of attack of 20, 30 degrees, it went to probably 80 to 90 degrees. So the reaction control jets could not get the nose back down. Now, did he get it there, or did the reaction control jets not work right? That's been a controversy for 50 years, ever since Chuck flew the mission. But anyway, it was a reaction. He couldn't get the nose back down to a lower angle of attack, get the airplane flying back in. Yes, sir.
Colonel, we've enjoyed this very much. I think I speak for all of us in saying you've done a wonderful job. I wanted to ask, is it a decent flying, a decent instrument airplane at all?
Oh, yeah. I flew a lot of weather in the F-104, and you know, if you fly at flying airspeeds for the airplane, it's like, maybe it's not exactly like flying the Cessna 172 into Burbank in bad weather, but yeah, you flew the gauges, you flew the, you know, you did the same old thing you always did. You fly the attitude and you keep your head in the cockpit and believe your instruments and don't let the vertigo get to you or anything like that when you're in the weather. Yes, I would say it was a good instrument flying airplane.
Could I have one question too, Mike?
Yes, Greg.
Before you took off for the NF missions, did you have a set altitude in mind? Say, okay, I want to get to 100,000, 101, or did the airplane determine?
Yeah, there was a bunch of numbers you did. You calculated numbers and you planned numbers and you tried to shoot. I think I could have got higher if I had a little bit better rocket pressure. I think my rocket pressure on mine was only about 61 psi, and I think it would have been better if it was closer to 70. But that had a lot to do with the temperature of the hydrogen peroxide and JP4 combination in the rocket engine. It also had a lot to do with the temperature at the altitude you were going at. So yeah, I would have liked to have gone to 104,000 like Dean Beacon, my buddy, did. I went to 101. So, but one of the test pilots, Bob Smith, who flew it a lot before Chuck Yeager did. Matter of fact, he was the guy that tried to check Chuck Yeager out, but I understand trying to tell Chuck much was a difficult project in itself. Anyway, Bob Smith got it to 118,000 feet. Yes, sir.
On your NF-104 flight, at that altitude and that speed, when you re-entered the atmosphere, were there any heating problems?
There could have been. If you didn't control your speed, because you basically start to re-enter, the re-entry could work. You could be it, and you could re-enter at Mach 2 still, and not have heating problems. I guess I might have been a little hot because I had a little, and I don't know whether it was me or just, maybe it was from the sitting there before I even took off and I didn't notice it. But I had little bubbles on the bottom of the radome on the nose when I come in. Yes, you had to fly a specific airspeed to not over-tempt the airplane coming in. A little bit like a space shuttle, but you're well below the space shuttle re-entry altitudes. Because, you know, astronauts, to get astronaut wings, you had to fly to 250,000 feet. They did that in the X-15. I went to 101,000 feet, so I was never close to an astronaut. That's why I said astronaut prep school that I went through. Core questions, or should we go to out and watch the airplanes fly? If anybody's got any more, I'll wander back to the 104 while we're getting ready for the demo. Anything else? Thanks, everybody.
All right. Well, thank you, Colonel Lilac. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We're fortunate